So we're doing a film frequency review today. We've got Rob on from Toronto. Hi, Rob.
Hey guys, good to be
And
here.
Ross in Kilkeel. And
Hello.
these two have managed to get some sneaky early screenings to possibly the biggest blockbuster this year, which is Dune, which I'm a little envious of. So we'll just go straight into a non-spoiler review, see what you guys thought of it. So, Rob, what were your initial thoughts?
My initial thoughts and my thoughts since are that I feel that this is really the best cinematic experience I had since Blade Runner 2049. It's just such a visual feast, and it's the way that Denis Villeneuve manages to tackle so many subplots as well as philosophical themes in a coherent way over the course of 2 hours and 30 minutes and deliver something that feels tense and visceral from almost beginning to end. It's an incredible film, and you really feel something emotionally through Hans Zimmer's soundtrack and just the entire intensity of the IMAX experience. So I really walked away very satisfied. My expectations were exceeded in terms of this movie. I thought it would be much more of a mainstream Hollywood compromised vision, and I didn't get that at all. And yeah, I really love this movie.
Okay, Ross, what were your initial thoughts?
I guess it's sort of similar. I wasn't maybe as blown away by it as Rob was. But I would say, having previously discussed Blade Runner 2049 on the podcast and not being overly won over by it, I think that this for me was a far more accessible movie for Villeneuve. But I went into it with absolutely no expectations at all. I've seen clips. I've never seen the full thing. I've seen clips of the movie from the 80s with Sting, and I was interested to see if they were going to go down that route again. They didn't. But I think I had an awful lot of fun with it. I really, really enjoyed it. And it does sort of leave you wanting to see more of that particular world, whether that's through the characters or through the setting. But I think it was a lot more than what I was expecting it to be. So I was pleasantly surprised.
Nice.
Would have been good if Sting could have made a cameo. Maybe that would have bumped
Well,
it up
he
a
might
few
come in part
points.
2. You never know. Fingers crossed.
So, how did you find the story? Because obviously this is adapted from a book, a very well-known sci-fi book that, a lot of other sci-fis have kind of jumped from and used elements of, like Star Wars. And obviously this film's kind of splitting the book in two. So, and I've heard things about the ending is a little abrupt because it's really the end of halfway through a story. How did you find the story in general, and then how it ended?
I found that the story, it was quite well structured overall. I would compare the structure of this film to Sicario in that the first 40 minutes to an hour are pretty much laying out the fundamentals and the foundation of the world that we're about to step into. Is almost a lead up to Arrakis and kind of helping us understand the function of this universe and how it operates before we really get into the meat of the story and the action of the story. And in that way, the first maybe hour or so is a little bit more exposition heavy in terms of how we understand Frank Herbert's world. But as the story progresses, especially from midway onwards, it's just pure intensity. And I feel that when people describe Dune, it's oftentimes they say, oh, it's Game of Thrones, but in space. It honestly felt that way for me from the midpoint to the end. It is just harsh and violent, and you really question how the main characters are going to get out of their situation. It really felt like almost different chess pieces are being moved between the protagonist and the antagonist. It's really a great story, I felt, and structurally, the film begins by laying out that it's Dune Part 1. So I think people should walk in expecting that you are just going to see half of a story. And the ending, I didn't feel that was abrupt personally, but there's definitely emotional arcs that still need to be concluded. But overall, that conclusion in this movie that takes place, the final scene, more or less, it was so harsh and intense and quite violent, actually, that it was a relief for me in terms of seeing something that's PG-13 and doesn't feel like some sort of sanitized hero story. It feels like something that feels the film feels real in the violence that takes place. It doesn't feel like some sort of superhero epic type story that's taking place. It's something that's harsh that's taking place for our protagonist. I really was quite satisfied with the ending, and it does leave you wanting more. So I think that's what people need in order for that part 2 to actually happen.
It's good. So does it actually open saying Dune Part 1?
Yes,
Yeah.
which is a pretty ballsy move, I think.
Yeah, it is ballsy. Yeah. I think maybe they need to get that out there in the audience circles, to just, as you said, to kind of let people know this is the first part of a story. Because even when I first watched Lord of the Rings, I didn't understand what a trilogy was, or I didn't understand how a film could be, or a story could be broken over multiple films. And therefore I was very confused. I remember as a kid with Fellowship of the Ring. But I think that might help for people.
I think it will. I think people will walk in, they'll see the part 1 and be like, oh, this really felt like an epic. I wonder what's going to happen next. So if that enthusiasm is generated, I think that they will make another one, just to make something that's fully cohesive.
And what about the actors and the characters? Obviously, there's a lot of, as you were saying, chess pieces being moved, a lot of different characters, feels very lived in. Is it balanced where you get to meet each character? Do you like the characters?
For me, that was the big selling point for this, I think, as a whole, was you see the cast list and you're like, this is incredible. And I think they're all very, like, certainly the quote unquote good guys are, to me, very well realized throughout the piece. I thought that, and I don't know how Rob feels about this, I thought that the villains of the piece, the Harkonnens, were they felt a bit sort of flat, but I guess you don't really spend too much time with them during the piece. But certainly, Duncan Idaho, aka Khal Drogo himself, Jason Momoa, that's potentially, I think, the best character name I've ever heard in my life. It's just incredible. And then you have who else? Josh Brolin is sort of like the sidekick to Oscar Isaac, and they're both really, really well realized. What's his face? Timothy Chalamet, also very, very good in the lead role. Just all of the characters, very, very well done, very, very well done. But just for me, I felt the villains were lacking a little bit. But I guess you'll maybe spend more time with them in the sequel.
I see what you mean. I think that the Harkonnens overall, they don't have as much depth as the main players from the Atreides house, but overall, the Harkonnens, when you see them, they are such an overwhelming threat that their position as antagonists, I feel, is really you question how the Atreides are going to overcome them, because they are so tense every scene that they appear in, that almost the scenes that they are in are some of my favorite. And their planet that looks like something out of Alien, like, it's just so they did such an excellent job in terms of displaying villains that are threatening, and I got that sense in terms of how harsh and violent that they are. They were definitely some of my favorite elements from the story. But overall, yeah, the acting is superb. And like many people mentioned, Stellan Skarsgård in other reviews, Stellan Skarsgård kind of has this Marlon Brando and Apocalypse Now type feel to him, and I guess it's just the bald head and being a little chunky, but he definitely had that sense to him. The performances, I agree with Ross completely. They were all felt realized. It didn't feel none of the emotions felt false in any way, even from the smaller supporting cast.
And obviously, Denis Villeneuve managed to recruit the big guns himself, Hans Zimmer, to do the soundtrack for this. Actually, I think Hans Zimmer turned down Christopher Nolan's last project to go do this one. So
That's
what did we think of the soundtrack? Have we got a classic on our hands?
I don't know so much if there's a classic, but there is some really interesting stuff in there. Like there's a bit where the House Atreides arrives on Arrakis for the very first time, and there's like bagpipes.
That exact thing. I was going to mention that exact
that just come out of nowhere, and it's weird because it works.
Yes.
And you're like, oh, it's really sort of nice feeling. And yeah, like I said, whenever the Harkonnens attack, there's a really good score, and I can't see it being like something that people are going to be remember for a very long time, but I think it is very, very good and very, very effective.
Yeah, I thought that I was going to mention the exact same example because that bagpipe scene, I've been listening to it since.
Yeah.
Because it's just so, in terms of telling a story, it's so appropriate as well. These colonizers, quote unquote, are arriving on a foreign planet. And of course, there's some sort of bagpipes being used within the soundtrack. It just works so well, but it's such a lot of odd musical decisions, but it does give you that sense that you're listening to something foreign. And I think that Hans Zimmer accomplished something that's very, very unique. I've never heard a soundtrack that kind of had that type of, I don't know, those types of themes. Even with the bagpipes, there's sounds of like clanking metal in between. It's very experimental in a lot of ways. So I wouldn't necessarily call it a classic in the sense that, it sounds like, the final themes from Inception or something like that, Time, or, the usual Chris Nolan themes. But it is something that is experimental and works within the context of the story overall.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nice. So he's went from organs to bagpipes. Yeah, he's trying his hand at something different for each soundtrack.
He'll get to the xylophone in time.
Yeah, I'm sure he will. So I assume because it's a Denis Villeneuve film that it is stunning and beautiful looking. Would you agree? Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it's very much something that needs to be seen on as big a screen as you possibly can. It's one of those things. Again, I think it probably will hold up quite well off the screen as well, but certainly you need to see it on the big screen. The shots of Arrakis, like at various different points during the day, are all very, very different. Like, it's beautiful. And like I said, there's just so much wonderful imagery. Like the bit whenever like they walk into the room and Baron Harkonnen is in like this pool, which I think you've seen in the trailers and stuff. It's like this pool of oil, and he just like appears out of this pool of oil. It's so weird looking, but just like really, really visually striking. And just the choice of colors throughout is very, very good.
Yeah, for sure. It's some of the original art from the Dune books, or were inspired by the Dune books. From some of the art from the 60s, I think, were the main inspiration for this movie, and it's very monochromatic, and a lot of the imagery is quite dark. Again, for a PG-13, they did a good job of kind of teetering towards that R rating, the American R rating. in terms of, especially midway through when there's some hostages at stake, it's pretty intense in how they depict visually some of the confrontations. Not only that, like the sweeping sand vistas throughout the movie are gorgeous, but the cinematography isn't scared to also be gritty as well. Like towards the end, I noticed that there are a few shots that are quite grainy, which you wouldn't necessarily expect a film like Dune to have that type of grittier texture to it. You almost think a project on this scale and such a huge budget, every shot is going to be refined and at 8K, some sort of like super sharp 8K refined image, and they aren't scared to kind of be a little bit more dirty with the imagery as well. It's a good balance, I felt, between the two contrasting elements.
Nice. I just can't. I'm looking forward to watching this now. So, just final thoughts. Where did it live up to your expectations? Are you looking forward to the next one? What would you say to someone if they weren't sure if they were going to watch it or not? And what would you give it out of 10?
Can go first.
Of course. For me, it surpassed the expectations that I had with it, but I didn't have huge expectations to begin with. I would say that anyone that has found some of Villeneuve's previous work a bit impenetrable, I think this is by far his most mainstream picture to date. But still, like Rob said, maintaining that sort of lovely style and art house style, that it doesn't feel like he's completely sold out. But I still think it's a very, very accessible, and it's particularly for a generation of people who have now watched and grown up with Game of Thrones. It is very much the Game of Thrones of space. I think, I would highly recommend checking this one out, and especially, like I said, try and see it in a cinema if you can. If you have an IMAX near you, even better. But all in all, I'd probably say like an 8 out of 10. 8 out of 10.
I would say I would probably give the film a 9 out of 10. I think it's very close to being. I mean, I don't think that you can make half of Dune. I don't think you can make a better version of the first half of Dune than this.
Yeah.
Like, I really think that this is the best possible version of half of the book that exists. It's so coherent for something that's presenting so many different ideas. And it's not in a way that feels Christopher Nolan-y, where you're just like big exposition dumps and you just somehow have to follow it. It's done in Villeneuve's style of, really that visual storytelling is guiding us through the whole story and you can make sense of it. I would say that, this is for sure worth a watch, especially in an IMAX if you can manage. I don't think that you'll walk away from the IMAX experience disappointed at all. I think there's just too much amazing level of craft taking place on the screen for you to walk away disappointed. I would definitely recommend this to everyone to watch.
Do you think it's because it's the first part of a story, do you think that it has the ability to be almost elevated if the next part really knocks it out of
100%?
Absolutely.
100%.
Absolutely.
I think even Villeneuve said, the first half of Dune is kind of the legwork that he needs to present. It's where you first present the world building elements and how the fundamentals of how this universe operates. But in the second half, he believes it would be just pure cinematic pleasure in terms of, you don't have to introduce those elements anymore. It's all been done in that first half. So,
well, I think, you've definitely sold it to me. Game of Thrones in space. Sign me up just from that line alone. And I'm looking forward to seeing it in a few weeks' time. And fingers crossed that it resonates with everyone else as well. Thanks for coming on, guys. And for everyone else, you can find some of our podcasts on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and you can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.